Hey guys, there's a new ZOS article that gives a lot more details on the Dragonknight rework, so we're gonna go over it. I'm gonna try to account for all PvE roles and playstyles, but keep in mind that I'm mostly a tank and solo player, and I have very limited knowledge of PvP. I'm going to skip over some stuff at the beginning because it's mostly a repetition of what they've already been saying and doesn't add much. If you wanna read it, just read the article yourself. The only important thing said there is that they're completely moving away from the poison theme, and that they'll be putting it on a different class. So now let's move to the abilities. Starting off with the Ardent Flame skill line and Dragonknight standard. This ultimate and the Standard of Might morph no longer deal damage to enemies inside or apply major defile. Instead, these ultimates grant you and up to 11 allies standing in the area increased weapon and spell damage 375 and reduced damage taken 12%. And this effect cannot stack. Standard of Might significantly increases these bonuses for the caster of the ultimate. It adds 425 weapon and spell damage and 13% reduced damage taken. So the caster gets 800 weapon damage and 25% damage reduction. And the shifting standard continues to work as originally designed, dealing damage and applying major defile, rather than the new functionality. So will this new standard be actually good ultimate for tanks, or support in general? Well, 375 weapon and spell damage is kind of comparable to the major force from Aggressive Horn. It's a bit less, but it's comparable. And considering the longer duration compared to Horn, I feel like this is gonna be straight up better than Horn, provided your teammates can actually stay inside of the standard. And there's also the reduced damage on top of all that. Now the better question is, will Standard Might be used by damage dealer DKs? But for that we'll have to wait and see how it compares to other DK ultimates, which are also getting buffs. And all of them will be usable by these. Next ability, Lava Whip now becomes a Volcanic Whip for 7.9 seconds after it damages an off-balance enemy. The time window activation can only occur once every 20 seconds. Volcanic Whip costs half as much, deals 33% more damage, and deals its damage in a 5 meter radius around the original target. This change was made to help introduce the Flame Lash morph gameplay element sooner, while also making the window of interaction with off-balance less restrictive. You now get a guaranteed window of time after hitting the off-balance target, rather than being forced to drop everything you're doing while off-balance is active. These abilities no longer set immobilized or stunned enemies off balance, with Source of Balance on a new passive you'll read about later, in a different skill line. Flame Lash now heals you anytime the ability deals damage, rather than only when the Power Lash version is active. This morph sees the same change to activating Power Lash as the base ability does. And Molten Whip continues to rework the ability into a more self-contained building effect, focused on high single target burst damage. It remains split in cost of Magma and Stamina, but now generates stacks when using any Dragonknight ability, other than itself, instead of only building off Ardent Flame abilities. This should make the build up more rewarding while using a more Dragonknight ability heavy rotation, and feeling more organic and rhythmic to use. Adjusted the stack bonus to 33% per stack, up from 20, but reduced the duration to 10 seconds, down from 15 seconds, to account for the new ability timers. So, Flame Lash healing you sounds nice, but I still don't think that will be enough to choose it over Molten Whip, even for solo. But I'll definitely be testing it. And it's nice to see the Molten Whip bonus go back up to 33%, like it used to be. Next up we have Searing Strike. This ability and its morphs now last for 10 seconds, down from 20 seconds, but deal 50% more damage per second, to make up for the shorter duration. Venomous Claw has been reworked to Searing Claw, which deals flame damage instead of poison damage, but it remains a stamina morph that increases damage per tick, which has been increased to match the same power increase with the shorter duration. And the Burning Embers heal now scales off max health rather than damage done, to offer a more helpful tool for tanks to gain some staying power in combat. So I really like these changes, but this is also basically just moving back to the way dots worked before update 35. And as for Burning Embers, that's going to be extremely strong in some situations. I mean, even with current implementation of Burning Embers, which heals you base of damage done, I managed to get a lot out of it in some fights with multiple enemies. Like for example, the first fight in Dreadseer Reef in hard mode. I was placing both Structured Entropy and Burning Embers on lots of different targets, like the boss, the Atronachs, the wolves, which gave me a lot of healing over time in preparation for the difficult phase. So now I'm expecting it to be way stronger, because tanks don't deal much damage, so making it scale of max health should make it much stronger. Now, Core of Flame. It doesn't say it, but it's basically Inhale, and it's been moved to Ardent Flame, which is why I'm talking about it now and not later. This ability and its morphs no longer deal damage instantly or heal for the damage cost. These abilities now restore 15% of your missing Magma and Stamina, 3 times over 4 seconds. They continue to deal damage around you after the duration ends. Soul of Flame, originally Deep Breath, continues to add an interrupt on the initial activation, but it now interrupts after a 350 millisecond delay, instead of instantly, for better visual syncing and counterplay. This morph also continues to increase the damage of the explosion, which has increased to a 33% bonus, up from 25%. And Heart of Flame, originally Draw Essence, now heals you for 15% of your missing health each tick. It no longer adds magma when damaging enemies, as that function of resource recovery is now part of the base ability. So I really don't like the delay on the interrupt. Interrupting isn't something where 350 milliseconds doesn't matter. Now, the consequences of missing an interrupt are different in every place, but I'm sure this stupid delay is going to cause a lot of frustration when it causes you to miss some really important interrupt. Next we have Hearthfire, which used to be Ash Cloud. This ability and the original Cinderstorm morph now grant minor fortitude and heroism to allies inside the area, rather than slowing enemies' movement speed by 70%. We increase the radius to 8 meters, up from 5, on all versions of this ability. Firekeeper, originally Cinderstorm, continues to increase the healing effectiveness by 50%, but now only does so if the caster is inside the area of effect. To make up for this, however, it also causes minor fortitude and heroism to stick to allies for 15 seconds after being healed. Hearth and Home, originally Eruption, no longer reworks the ability into a damaging effect, and instead remains a healing effect. This morph continues to reduce enemy movement speed inside the area by 70%. This morph now also grants the caster major protection while inside the area, to help the ability be more valuable to tanks. Okay, so I really like minor heroism being put on like an AoE healing ability. I feel like this is something ZOS kept trying to introduce, but they kept doing it with item sets, and it would never be worth it to sacrifice a 5-piece set for minor heroism. Minor fortitude is 15% health recovery, so it's a big whatever, a useless buff. We can't completely ignore it. Firekeeper sounds pretty nice for healers, and as for Hearth and Home, I am somewhat skeptical. Or at least I'm skeptical about helping groupmates with it. I'm not skeptical about helping myself with it. Because with an 8-meter radius on the AoE, it's going to be extremely difficult to stay inside the area as a tank, have it heal your teammates, and at the same time not put any cleave attacks from the boss onto your teammates. I feel like tanks will just put it under themselves. There will obviously be some exceptions from this, like for example in the Ansul fight, I feel like you could stay inside of the circle yourself, while also reaching both groups of the DDs, but we'll see. Next we have Inferno. This ability and the Flames of Oblivion morph now fire a massive wave of flame in an 8-meter radius, rather than firing a limited number of fireballs to enemies in a 50-meter radius. This removes the original target cap of the abilities. We increase the cost to 4050 per activation, up from 2160, to account for the new area melting potential. We reduce the chance of applying burning stats effect to 5%, down from 10, to account for these changes. Now Incinerate, originally Flames of Oblivion, now deals 10% more damage, and has a 15% base chance of applying burning, now that the morph can no longer increase the target count. So yeah, that sounds pretty nice. Next we have Combustion. Oh, and for the passives I'm only going to read out the rank 2 values, and completely ignore the rank 1. So, this passive now grants you 225 magma and stamina when applying burning with an Ardent Flame ability slotted, with a 1-second cooldown, rather than 423 when applying burning or poisoned, with a 3-second cooldown. This passive no longer increases the damage done by burning or poisoned, and the burning part has been moved to a different passive, and has been improved. Traumatic Burns, originally Warmth, now causes enemies with damage with a direct Ardent Flame ability to take 5% increased flame damage, while reducing their movement speed by 30% for 5 seconds, rather than increasing your damage over time effects against them by 6% and reducing their movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds. This is now where the old Engulfing Flames effect lives, and it should be easier to keep up. Fan the Flames, originally Searing Heat, now increases your chance of applying burning by 50%, and the damage it does by 25%. These values increase by 10% and 5% per Dragonknight ability slotted. This passive no longer extends the duration or damage of some of your Ardent Flame abilities. And a Soul Ablaze, originally Burning card, now increases your healing taken by 8%, rather than 9% when meeting certain conditions. And the condition was having a Draconic Power ability active. Now moving on to Draconic Power. First we have Dragonknight. We rebuilt how this ability handles the movement aspect under the hood to be more modern, fixing numerous inconsistencies compared to other movement abilities and unique bug cases. We fixed numerous issues with the knockback being desynced from the actual damage impact, which should also make it easier to counteract the CC effects as an opponent. This ability and the Take Flight morph now deal flame damage rather than physical damage. We reduce the damage of the base ability by 16% to account for the damage change, as there are numerous ways to amplify this effect back to similar or higher values. So take flight. This morph now fills you with Draconic Fury for 15 seconds after activation, which increases your damage down by 10% and doubles against monsters. This morph no longer extends the range or reduces the cost, and we decrease the base damage by 90% to account for other potential damage increases. Ferocious Leap now instantly applies the damage shield for 10 seconds, instead of applying it after a delay for 6 seconds. Increase the potency by 4%. This morph now knocks enemies up rather than away, to make it more tank friendly, so they can control the fight rather than disrupt it. Depending on feedback, we may make this change to crowd control a universal one, as there's value in many cases to have it be less disruptive. The only reason we haven't so far is because it takes away some of that badass feeling of crushing down like a dragon, and pushing foes back in all directions. Let us know your thoughts. I think they really have to remove the knockback, especially since the ability looks very promising, so I'm expecting DDs to want to use it, which is going to create tensions between the DDs, their tanks, and their raid leads. As for Ferocious Leap, unless they change the scalings, there's no way it will be useful for tanks. Next we have Dragonfire Breath, originally Fiery Breath. Decrease the duration to 10 seconds down from 20, and increase the damage per second by 50%. This ability is now a stamina ability at base. Disintegrating Dragonfire, originally Noxious Breath, now deals flame damage, rather than poison damage. It remains a stamina ability and continues to add Major Breach, while applying the respective stats effect, now Burning, to all enemies affected by the initial hit. Engulfing Dragonfire, originally Engulfing Flames, is now the Rework morph, which costs magic kinds of stamina. This morph now channels the flame attack in front of you over 4.8 seconds, and deals 20% increased damage when it hits an enemy, up to once every second, and up to a maximum of 80%. While Take Flight is active, this deals maximum damage. This damage is considered direct damage. For being called a Dragonknight, the class has always been missing the most iconic feeling of being a dragon, unleashing unabated flame upon their foes, with a channeled flame breath. We also realize that many of our players have expressed the desire to enjoy the game at a slower pace, and as we've introduced similar attacks into higher levels of play, with Heavy Axe builds and Fate Carver, we want to make sure there are more flavors to this experience, each with their own distinctions in how you build and play. This morph won't be bringing the same heat as either of those builds alone, but it should help take some pressure off constantly needing to press down the gas pedal buttons. Okay, so it turns out our predictions based on the German translation were right. Engulfing is a channeled ability. I really like the idea, but I also have to see it in action. And I like the interaction with Take Flight, which in my opinion gives all the more reason to remove the knockback from Take Flight, so you can actually hit them with the AoE ability you're supposed to follow up with. Next we have Dark Talons. No major changes to note outside of patch notes. This one just looks cooler and should look a little less buggy when used against immobilized immune targets. Now Dragon Blood. This ability and the Green Dragon Blood morph now heal based on your max health, and increase based on your missing health, rather than scaling exclusively off your missing health. This should make them more reliable and comparable to other self heals. They will still be weaker at higher health though, compared to other abilities like it. Blood of the Green Dragon, originally Green Dragon Blood, has just a slight name change. And Blood of the Elder Dragon, originally Coagulating Blood, continues to change the heal scaling to offensive stats. It now also heals allies within 10 meters of you, for 2/3 of the original scaling. It also grants Minor Courage and Major Fortitude to any heal target, instead of just Major Fortitude to you. Support builds might like this one. I really like the change because, so far, Green Dragon Blood was just pure garbage. And it was always sad to me seeing beginner tanks follow some bait guide and cuck themselves with that ability, because Coagulating was straight up stronger. An ability that heals purely based on missing health has no place in a game with so many healing absorb effects. Half the bosses in this game will apply a healing absorb effect to you, which you straight up can't do anything about with Green Dragon Blood, until you drop to a much lower health, at which point it's usually too late. So yeah, I really like these changes. As for the buffs on the Blood of the Elder Dragon, Major Fortitude is health recovery, so it's mostly useless. And as for Minor Courage, it might be a nice source if it actually affects all 11 allies. Because if it only targets 6, then it's comparable to the Scrubbing abilities that apply Minor Courage. Next we have Wing Buffet, originally Protective Scale. This ability and the Protective Plate morph now knock enemies within 6 meters of you back 4 meters after a slight delay. These abilities continue to reduce your damage taken from ranged and projectile attacks by 50% for 6 seconds after activating. These abilities now grant Major Expedition, which moved from Fiery Grip, for 4 seconds after activating as well. Let those wings unfurl. Fleet Slip Wings, originally Protective Plate, only gets a name change. And Protect the Brood, originally Dragonfire skill, has been reworked to be a support morph. It no longer deals flame damage back to attackers while active, and sacrifices the new area knockback on activation. This morph grants group members within 12 meters 25% reduced damage taken from projectiles for 6 seconds, and adds minor protection for 20 seconds to you and group members affected. It continues to grant you Major Expedition as well. Note that this effect cannot stack with itself, or any other version of the ranged damage action. So, the ability sounds nice, although extremely situational, which I guess is fine. I can see it being very useful, for example, during the Necromancer phase in Lucent Citadel, or against the first boss in Halls of Fabrication, and I'm sure there are more cases, but no, I don't see it being like a staple ability, which is sad because the ability looks really cool. Next we have Chains of Flame, originally Fiery Grip. This ability and its morph's damage now always applies burning, for more synergistic gameplay with other parts of the Dragonknight kit. We added a special sound effect to the act of successfully pulling enemies, helping dial up the satisfaction of controlling your foes. This ability and the Unrelenting Grip morph now apply Major Cowardice for 10 seconds to the enemy, rather than granting you Major Expedition for 4 seconds, to make them more effective for tanks. Chains of Domination, originally Unrelenting Grip, increases the duration of Major Cowardice to 15 seconds to match taunt timers. Continues to refund the ability if the target is not pulled. Chains of Devastation morph now grants Major Evasion for 10 seconds after activating, to help you shrug off some of the damage you may receive for diving headfirst into combat. We increased the duration of the Major Berserk to 6 seconds, up from 4, to help it be more worthwhile to use in a rotation. Note that this, with the burning application, helps it do notably more damage, so beware the Dragonknight who pulls themselves to you. Okay, I'm also gonna talk about the chain. So basically they added Major Cowardice, which is what most of us tanks have already been doing with our chains, with the scribing chains. So that's a really nice change. Once we morph it, the Major Cowardice is longer, so it becomes superior to the scribing chain. Now I know the scribing chain can restore your magicka and stamina, so it could still be better, but Chains of Domination will refund the magicka cost if the target isn't pulled, and that will be the case against bosses. So if you're simply trying to keep up Major Cowardice on bosses, this is basically a free ability. And also, since it applies burning, it will always proc combustion, so it will always refund some magicka and stamina. Kinda like Druid's Resurgence on the scribing chain, though a bit lower value. Now moving on to passives. Burner Scales is just Iron Skin with a name change. World in Ruin now increases your damage done with AoE and dot attacks by 7%, rather than increasing your flame and poison damage by 5%. Elder Dragon now increases your health recovery by up to 700 based on your missing health, rather than 323 per Draconic power ability slotted. This passive now also grants you and nearby group members minor brutality for 20 seconds when you activate a Draconic power ability, moved from what was originally Molten's Blessing. Now, this should be pretty easy to keep up for tanks, pretty easy for DDs because they're gonna use the Dragonfire Breath, and a Dragonknight healer, I'm assuming, would keep it up with Blood of the Elder Dragon, since they would want to keep up the minor courage. The Storm Voice, originally Battle Roar, now grants you 16 health, magicka and stamina per ultimate spent, plus 6 to these values per Dragonknight ability slotted, rather than 37 health, magicka and stamina per ultimate spent. This should make this passive relatively effective for any who obtain it, while being even more effective for those who go all into the Dragonknight experience. This will be a buff at 3 or more Dragonknight abilities, while being weaker at less than 3. And moving on to Ardent, starting with Magma Armor. We increase the base duration to 12 to 15 seconds of this ultimate, and the Magma Shell morph, up from 7 to 10. But remove the flame damage on both of these versions. This means these effects will no longer scale with the Elfbane item set. For Magma Shell, we increase the radius of the shield granted to 28 meters for this morph, up from 8 meters, so more allies actually get the shield. Increase the shield size to 130 to 133% of the target's max health, up from 100%. Corrosive Armor now deals flame damage instead of poison damage. This means the effect can now scale with Elfbane. The base duration remains 10 seconds. We increase the damage per tick by 300%. This morph continues to cause you to ignore enemy armor while active, but now affects all damaging attacks, instead of just direct damage. To account for these massive power buffs, the damage limit has been adjusted to 8% of your max health, rather than 3%, causing you to take significantly more damage while the ultimate is active. This morph has always struggled to be a decent damage ultimate outside of PvP, despite presenting as an incredibly potent one. Additionally, a lot of the balance for the ultimate felt counterintuitive to the class design, failing to amplify their core part of their kit, damage over time effects. To compensate for making this more of a damage ultimate, we're dialing back how tanky you become while it's active, and we'll continue to monitor these effects. In general, seeing a Dragonknight activate this should instill immediate fear into their enemy, but not hopelessness. Okay, so I feel like trying to make Corrosive good for PvE is a completely futile effort. Because in PvE you have full control. You can prepare to penetrate exactly the amount of armor that the enemy will have. If you're going into instance content, you should and can bring 18,000 penetration with you, which makes that one aspect of Corrosive useless. And if you were to take a different approach of not bringing penetration and relying on Corrosive, then you do significantly less damage outside of the Corrosive window, which just isn't worth it. This aspect of ignoring enemy armor will just never be good in PvE. Superheated Ward, originally Stonefist, is now a Magma ability that grants you or an ally a sizable damage shield, scaling off your max Magma or stamina. We increase the cost to 4,590 at base. Think of this as superheating the air around your target so intensely that it prevents harm from coming through. This should help the support-oriented Dragonknight have a more direct option to protect their allies, while offering something completely different from the standard burst healing effect. Volcanic Ward, originally Obsidian Shard, adds a healing effect when the shield ends, to offer some supplementary healing to those you protect. It also reduces the next instance of damage taken by 10% from any attack. Note that ends means the following: the shield is replaced, the shield's duration runs out, or the shield breaks. And I want to give my feedback before I read the next ability, because the next ability changes things completely. So this shield sounds nice, but the issue with this kind of abilities is always targeting. There are many abilities like this one, which sound really nice, but when you try to use them in actual content, it turns out that it goes to some completely random target you completely didn't intend to heal or shield. So I really like the idea, but I hope it comes with some better targeting. I really hope it doesn't target people in a 360 radius around you, and you can somewhat control it by looking in a certain direction. Otherwise, it will be no different to wield so with damage shield. Now Magma Fist, originally Stone Giant. This morph continues to be focused on a stamina morph for damage dealers at range, with some support functions behind it, but it is significantly simpler to use. This morph now deals flame damage instead of physical damage. It no longer splits between two distinct versions or has a cast time. Its debuff has been renamed to Heat Shock, originally Stagger, lasts for 10 seconds up from 5 seconds, and now causes enemies to take 33 more damage from all sources per stack, down from 65. It also no longer stuns enemies on the third cast. This should rectify much of the complaints of this morph, which rightfully deemed it clunky and difficult to manage. The duration now follows the Dragonknight's dot timer of 10 seconds, doesn't require different range activations, and scales more effectively with the rest of their kit in general. We expect to hear some back in my day stories from tanks and DPS who lived with the previous version in the years to come. And yeah, I'm gonna say it. I understand people calling it clunky, but I also liked the skill expression of it as a tank. With the short duration of 5 seconds, and the stomp part of it, well, having a cast time and dropping your block, keeping up stagger was very difficult to pull off in some fights as a tank. And you had two ways to get around it. You could either have extremely good reaction time and squeeze the stomp between a bunch of attacks, which was risky, or if you had more knowledge of a fight, you could predict when the danger is coming and cast the stomp Stone Giant before it, so then when the danger is happening, you could safely keep up stagger with the stone throwing part instead of the stomp. It happened, for example, in Zalvaka. You could pre-buff the stomp before the long channeled heavy attack if you knew when it was coming, or if you were very fast, you could actually squeeze the stomp between her hits. But yeah, I get why people hated it. What I really don't like is their value nerf, because with 65, a fully stacked stagger was roughly a 4% damage increase, which was comparable to minor courage. Which is why, for example, my dungeon tank guide doesn't even use Stone Giant, because to slot it, I would have to remove Soul Burst, which provides minor courage, which is basically the same thing. So now, with the nerfed value of only 33, it should be roughly a 2% damage increase, which is pretty inconsequential. I wonder how groups are going to squeeze it into a team comp. Next we have Molten Weapons. This ability and its morphs now cause the caster's light and heavy attacks to deal an additional hit of flame damage, up to once every 2 seconds. This is akin to a sticky damage over time effect in terms of number scaling, and should add some more value to this skill line for damage dealers. While it may not boast raw numbers over other specialized effects, the group utility is more than enough to make up for that, to warrant consideration. Yeah, I'm really curious about the value, because if this ability deals damage decent enough for DDs to want to use it, then that solves so many team comp issues by granting everyone major brutality and sorcery. Next, Obsidian Shield. No large base changes for this one, just some number cleanup to account for the removal of the Eternal Mountain passive being reworked. As for Ignis Shield, we increased the shield size of the caster's version of the shield by roughly 12%, so it's closer to a standard self-shield ability. And for Fragmented Shield, this morph now scales with the caster's max Magma or Stamina, rather than max health, so it's more effective for support builds. Yeah, that's a pretty good change. Fragmented Shield was always weird because it had the major mending, which healers would like, but it also scaled with max health, so the damage shield provided by healers was extremely tiny. Next, Petrify. This ability and its morphs now have a real bona fide counterplay. Rather than instantly stunning the enemy target and ignoring both block and dodge, these abilities now reduce the enemy's target movement speed by 50% for 1 second. After 1 second, the target will become stunned for 4 seconds, or 8 seconds if they are a monster. This stun continues to bypass block, but does not bypass dodge. These abilities now also apply Minor Breach to the enemy for 10 seconds upon activation, helping give a potential, albeit rare, PvE use case. These abilities can now be cast on CC immune targets, so beware. This ability and the Fossilize morph no longer deal damage when the stun ends. We reduce the cost to account for these changes. Fossilize morph continues to immobilize after the stun ends, but it now also applies minor vulnerability and extends the duration of the minor debuffs to 20 seconds. And Shattering Rocks keeps the damage and healing on stun end. We increase the amount of damage and healing done by 50% to account for the new delay. I don't think the PvE use case will be that rare. It might be a decent source of Minor Breach for solo play, which would allow you to use something else other than ice stuff on your backbar. This is probably going to be one of the first things I'll test when PTS drops. I can't say more about it for now. Next we have Earth Spike Mantle, originally spiked armor. This ability and its morphs now increase your damage done by 100 while active, rather than causing you to deal damage back to melee attackers. This effect should make the ability far more useful to damage dealers, instead of being a largely exclusive sort of ability tool. The damage done bonus might seem small, but it adds up over the course of a fight. Okay, so the damage done bonus should be roughly 2%, because it's basically half of a current stagger. Shatter Spike Mantle, originally volatile armor, this morph's damage over time effect now scales with your offensive stats, rather than with your armor, doubling down as a viable damage option for DPS, while also helping you stay in the fight in the front lines with the extra armor. Additionally, when dealing damage with the effect, you add 1 additional stack of Avalanche, up to once every 10 seconds. This should help slightly expedite the time it takes to reach max stacks. This sounds extremely good for solo. Now moving into passives. Heart of Stone, originally scaled armor, is only getting a name change, inspired by lovers of rocks and stones. Avalanche, originally Eternal Mountain, now causes you to gain a stack of Avalanche when you deal damage, increasing your damage done by 1% per stack, up to 10 times. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds, and every 2 seconds you fail to deal damage, you lose a single stack. That sounds pretty nice, and with all the dots running, it should be very difficult to drop it. Blessing at the Peak, originally Mountain's Blessing, doesn't have any big changes. The group buff was moved to the Elder Dragon passive, and the ultimate generation remains here. Mountain Giant, originally Helping Hands, has been reworked. It now causes your fully charged heavy attacks to apply off balance to the enemy. This applies after the damage, so you can't instantly stun the target with this. Additionally, rank 2 of this passive causes your fully charged heavy attacks to generate 1430 stamina, and this is considered a proc, so no interplay of other effects, on top of whatever restore they'd normally grant, to help keep some of the original passive functionality. This passive should pair nicely with Lava Whip, while also just giving you a much more controlled and simple way of triggering off balance in general. So this should be extremely good, well, first for tanks, because you're going to heavy attack anyway to regain stamina, and now you'll also proc off balance, which will allow you to restore even more resources, and buff your allies who can actually utilize off balance, like any DD with Exploiter CP or Heavyak builds. And if you are a Heavyak build, well, you'll basically be proccing off balance automatically while doing your regular rotation. And this should be extremely good on one bar build specifically, because these always struggle with fitting some skill to proc off balance. So proccing off balance with Mountain Giant basically frees up a whole skill slot. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to stream the PTS on 12, and before that I'll try to finish and release the solo Templar guide, because once the PTS drops I want to focus entirely on it. So thanks for watching and see you next time.